Interactive media. We're going to talk a little bit about games here. Before I forget, I forgot earlier this week, so let's take a quick commercial break. I'll pass this clipboard around. The ministry, A Thinking Generation, we have a mailing list. If anyone would like to be on this list to get more information, don't worry, we don't flood your inbox with spam. It's every once in a great while that we'll send, here's some helpful information, here's a new series that we've released, here's a new article or something that you may find helpful. So I keep forgetting to do this, but I will pass this around if anybody's interested. Thanks, Caleb. 2 requests, please write legibly. If we can't read your email address, you won't be on the list. And please don't lose that really fancy pen I got from Peru, which was the only one I had in my backpack. Thank you. Okay, let's move on with interactive media. Many times parents come to me and say, yeah, we got rid of the TV. Totally understand that is not good. We just let them do educational games and more of the interactive forms of media. The research shows, though, that would be a false assumption to make that interactive media is better than the TV. In fact, studies show the opposite. One study was titled, Interactive Screen Time is Worse Than TV. This is Dr. Victoria Dunkley, a very famous researcher in media use. She found in her studies that just 30 minutes of either computer use or gaming caused disturbed sleep and daytime fatigue, compared to 2 hours or more of TV required for similar effects. You had to watch TV for 2 hours to get the same bad effects that only a half hour of a video game would give you. Video games and computer games are like television on steroids. They're all the bad effects intensified. The very interactiveness is overly stimulating to the nervous system, especially a developing one. Once the arousal stress cycle becomes chronic, it will eventually cause damage to the nervous system. And she adds, and I want to add this in here for the parents especially, mere moderation of screen time is often not sufficient to interrupt this vicious self-perpetuating cycle. In other words, if the child is exhibiting negative symptoms as a result of media use, simply reducing it will not be enough. You're going to need to cut it out completely. So while we're on this topic, let's talk about games. Games are everything bad about media rolled up into a package. We've yet to find a benefit from computer games or video games, other than the rather dubious, they can be used for training. They've been like flight simulators and stuff like that. But we're just talking about entertainment-style video games. We're not finding any benefit. In fact, video game designers hire, often, medical professionals to help them design the game. Not to make it more healthy, though. The developers strap beta testing teens with galvanic skin responses. That's a confusing way of saying that. Basically, these developers who are working on the video game, they take these teenagers who are beta testers for the game, and they attach various sensors to their body, one of them being galvanic skin responses that measure stress and adrenaline levels in the body, EKG, and blood pressure gauges. If the game doesn't spike their blood pressure to 180 over 140, they go back and tweak the game to make it have more of an adrenaline rush effect. Any medical professionals here? Is that a healthy blood pressure? No, that's terribly unhealthy. That's borderline dangerous. Why do they do that? Because it's addicting. And it makes them money. Let's talk about dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good chemical in the brain that is released in many different ways. There's nothing wrong with it. When you spend some time with your friends, you probably get some dopamine. When you enjoyed that nice, what'd you have for dessert today? You got some dopamine. A nice food, spending time together with friends. Another very strong releaser of dopamine, though, is accomplishing something. A sense of accomplishment gives a strong surge of dopamine. These are all good things, nothing wrong with it. But media causes a release of dopamine too. Bing, you get a little dopamine. Every text that comes in, little dopamine. Every like on Instagram, dopamine. Every like on Facebook, dopamine. Every one of those notifications, little dopamine. And you think, well, okay, that's fine, a little bit of feel good. It is, okay, in moderation. But the problem is, as you get more and more and more and more dopamine, the brain says, you know what, I'm getting plenty of dopamine here. Let's reduce some of the receptors. So it cuts back on some of the receptors. I'm kind of simplifying this neuroanatomy here, but it reduces the receptors in the brain, so you need more dopamine. So now what do you need to do? Send more texts, post more on Facebook, post more on Instagram, get more media time, play a more intense video game. Now you're getting more dopamine, more dopamine. Your body says, you know what, I'm getting plenty, let's shut down some more receptors. Now what do you need? More dopamine. More text. You get into hypertexting, where teenagers just sleep with their phones. They have to be woken up and constantly be texting. You have people posting pictures of themselves, selfies, brushing their teeth on Facebook. Why? Because it makes no logical sense. The reason they're doing it, though, is they're addicted to dopamine. They know that they'll get some likes and they'll get some dopamine. It's subconscious, I realize. And the problem is kids are so habituated to the hyperstimulating and dopamine-activating immersive screen reality that they choose to stay in the digital matrix. The reason why this effect is more powerful on children than adults is that children still don't have a fully developed frontal cortex, the part of the brain that controls executive functioning, decision-making, and impulse control. Children don't have the impulse control and consequential thinking parts of their brains developed. Adding to the problem, research shows that both drug use and excessive screen usage actually stunts the frontal cortex. Research indicates it stunts the frontal cortex not only in children, in adults also. So not only are games addicting, but that addiction perpetuates itself by negatively impacting the part of the brain that can help with impulsivity and good decision making. Do you see this carefully designed trap that Satan has engineered? Let's have an activity that is not only addicting, but it will damage the part of the brain that regulates an addiction and helps you make good decisions. So you get into this cycle. You don't have the parts of your brain able to regulate your usage, and you're using this addicting substance, and it becomes a trap that you can't get out of. And while I'm mentioning video games, you know what one of the most dangerous video games is? Minecraft. And you're saying, I've got 3 responses here. Somebody's saying, Minecraft, what's that? Good. Stay that way. Some of you are saying, Minecraft? Like, what's wrong with that? It's just building things. Exactly. Microsoft spends millions of dollars on this gaming software because they know it's an entering wedge. It seems so harmless. It gets you addicted to that sense of accomplishment, which, remember, releases dopamine. That is built into the system of Minecraft very clearly. And once you get hooked on that level of dopamine, now you need more, and you're going to go buy more video games. There's some of you who are probably saying, Minecraft, that's boring. That means you've already passed that stage of danger. So the key is to prevent your 4, 5, or 8-year-old from getting hooked on screens to begin with. That means Lego instead of Minecraft, books instead of iPads, and nature instead of TV. So the best treatment is prevention. I'm speaking to you, parents and teachers. Don't let it start. Don't even go there. Young people or adults who are addicted to these games, there are steps you can take to recover from the addiction. I can just run through them quickly. You'll want to take a digital detox. You want to take probably about a month where you just avoid screens completely. Then you want to engage during this time in outdoor activity as much as possible. Fresh air and sunshine helps combat addiction. You want to find an accountability partner, someone to work on this together, maybe someone else who has a game addiction, and you want to work together on this. You be careful with the diet. Sugar and refined foods and things like that help accentuate an addiction. So avoiding those and having a natural diet as much as possible helps. And of course, prayer and trust in the Lord. But really that key step that is often missed as people try to escape from a video game or a media addiction is they don't take the detox period. You've really got to cut it off for about, like I said, approximately a month. Just take away completely. That helps the brain reset. Because any amount of media you do during that time is just feeding a little dopamine into the brain, and it just helps perpetuate the addiction and keep it going. So taking that break is key. Let's talk about attention deficits. ADHD has become a huge problem in recent years, and not only in children, but also in adults. And the most significant connection between ADHD and media is the very fact that media is designed to hold your attention. And you say, what's wrong with that? If it's holding your attention, why is it causing an attention problem? Well, because it's holding it for you. You're not actually choosing to pay attention. The media is forcing you to pay attention. Let me explain. Much of the early development of physical and mental skills and their foundations in the brain comes from experimenting and solving problems with real-world materials. The long-term outcomes of forcing children's attention unnaturally may have even more serious implications than we have realized. I want to just mention here, some of you are going, man, all this research on children, does it apply to me too? Yes. This is just my specific area of research, but you could find the same research in adults too. It just tends to be accentuated in children. So please apply these no matter what age you are, even though it says children. But notice it says it's forcing the attention. Most children's programs, or media in general, are planned with an eye to capitalizing on these involuntary responses. What kind of responses? Involuntary. In other words, are you choosing to respond, or are you doing it automatically? You're doing it automatically. So there are three things in particular that grab our attention quite well. You have loud noises, bright colors, and quick movements. So imagine I'm standing here speaking, and all of a sudden, over there in the corner, boom, and a pink mouse ran across the platform here. What would you do? Would you just calmly stay watching me? No, every head would watch that mouse as it ran across the platform. Imagine, though, no boom, no bright colors. It was just a little brown mouse, and he ran across the platform. Would you watch me? Nope. Your head would still go right to that mouse. Why? Because it was moving. And if while you're watching that mouse, I yelled and started waving my arms, your attention is going to go back to me. That's a natural response of the brain. When something's moving quickly, you say, whoa, I better pay attention to that. I've actually been using that example with the mouse for a while. And a couple of years ago, it happened. I was in the audience. I was listening to another speaker. It was outdoors. And a mouse ran across the stage. It really did happen. And so I looked at all the audience. Is my example true? Sure enough, every head watching that mouse totally lost interest in the speaker. But why? Well, the mouse is probably more interesting than me. I could understand that. But the real reason you did it is because it was moving quickly and grabbed your attention. And that's for our safety. God has built us this way to protect us. If, suppose I'm standing here talking and somebody stepped in that back door and threw a ball at me, what would I do? Would I if I was good, I'd probably catch it, right? I would not just, what should I do? This ball's coming at me. No. Without thinking, I'm going to duck or maybe catch it. That's the natural response. I'm not even going to process. It's just going to happen. You're walking down the street, and you pass a driveway, a house, and there's a dog, a really big dog. But he's sleeping, no problem. So you walk past the house. And then you hear a noise, you catch a movement, when the dog is coming right at you, running full tilt, mouth open, he's about to eat you. What are you going to do? That's a dog. I wonder what I should do about this. No, you're going to kick, you're going to jump, you're going to fly if you can, you're going to act first and think later. That's the natural response of your body. Your body says, whoa, do something, act, move, and then you think about it later. Media designers understand this very well, and they utilize these natural responses of the brain to grab your attention over and over and over and over. More than just grabbing your attention, though, it actually triggers the brain's responses to danger. Your brain thinks that this is dangerous over and over and over and over. And so you get the adrenaline levels raised, and you get the addiction cycle started. But specifically when it comes to attention problems, is that children or adults are conditioned to having something else hold their attention. They lose the power to hold attention for themselves. Make sense? It's just this conditioning process where it's just pay attention, pay attention, pay attention. And soon when they're outside of that, where there's not something forcing them to pay attention, They can't do it because they're out of practice. And again, this relates to adults also. There was a great book called The Shallows. I forget the subtitle of it, but it was basically looking at how the designers of the current internet as it functions have actually done extensive psychological study to make you switch as often as possible. They don't want you focused on one thing for a long period of time. So it's actually telling your brain to constantly switch from one thing to another, because that's how they make their money, is by page views. It's built that way. In the last 50 years, we've created platforms in which we present things in surreal time, faster than reality. When you condition the mind to become accustomed to high levels of input, there's a chance that reality can just become boring. Essentially, when it comes to using electronics as a means to engage a reward, it works until it doesn't. Soon, more and more stimulation is required for focus, identical to mechanisms in drug addiction. When children report non-screen activities as boring, have you heard this, parents? Oh, that's boring. That should be a red flag to parents and educators. The child has become accustomed to an unnatural level of stimulation. Many, many more studies we could go through from some of the top research organizations. I like it best how Herman Maurer put it: we are headed toward a global attention deficit syndrome. If this keeps it up, we're just not going to know how to pay attention anymore. Point number 7, digital dementia. We've heard of dementia, right? We've all heard of dementia. We know what that is. What age does dementia usually come? 80? Yep, later in life, right? The elderly typically. Well, they've started finding, approximately, the study was first done in South Korea, which has the highest smartphone ownership in the world. And they also did a study in UCLA, and they're finding around 15% of the population of young people exhibiting symptoms of dementia. Young people. So they started doing some research, brain scans and all that stuff, and they're like, this is physiological, these are physiological alterations happening in the brain that look like someone who has dementia, but it's in young people. What in the world could be causing this? The one in South Korea, they defined it as a deterioration in cognitive abilities that is more commonly seen in people who have suffered a head injury or psychiatric illness. The UCLA study found 14% of young people between the ages of 18 and 39 complained of memory problems. And they found, as I mentioned, it wasn't just a complaint of memory problems. This was an actual physiological change that was happening in the brain. Individuals who rely heavily on technology may suffer deterioration in cerebral performance, such as short-term memory dysfunction. How many of you can remember 20 phone numbers? Anyone? Like, no way. 20? Oh, 20? Wow, I'm impressed. That's very rare. 10 phone numbers, anyone? 10. Wow, we have a 10. This is a good group. 5? You have 10 also? Wow, that's great. 5? Okay, a few 5s. Can't remember your own phone number? Right. Thanks for your honesty, Jake. This is not psychological, though. It's happening because we're outsourcing our thinking to this handy thing called a smartphone. We don't have to type a phone number in anymore. We just talk to it now. Maybe we open it and hit the name, but half the time we just say, "Hey, phone, call my mom," or whatever, and it calls it. We have no thinking involved, no memory needed. They're finding the same with. I can attest to the sense of direction. I used to have a really good sense of direction. Been there once, I could do it again 5 years later in the dark. Now, with this handy dandy smartphone that I use for GPS, I've got to do it like 3 or 4 times before I finally know how to get somewhere. And again, these are changes that are happening in our brain. It's not just a psychological thing. Manfred Spitzer put it well: many children don't memorize anything because they can Google it. But is it just children? How many of you have had the experience where you needed some bit of information, you Googled it, 5 minutes later you're like, wait, what was the answer to that again? And you Googled it again. Our memories are deteriorating quickly. Anterior cingulate cortex damage. Let's focus on that for a moment. This is of particular concern. You may remember, if you were here on Wednesday night, I talked about the anterior cingulate cortex. It's the core of the frontal lobe. Very important for many functions: impulse control, decision-making, emotion, controlling emotional responses, attention, motivation. But the last two on that list, error detection and the center of the free will. Is that important for a Christian? Vital skills for the Christian. What they're finding is something called media multitasking is specifically targeting this part of the brain. Higher media multitasking activity is associated with smaller gray matter density in the anterior cingulate cortex. Now let's just be clear, smaller gray matter density from a standpoint of those who want to keep their brains healthy is not a good thing. This means this part of the brain is shrinking from media multitasking. You say, okay, what in the world's media multitasking? Well, have you ever been watching a video and texting your friend at the same time? Have you ever been working on the computer, but you make sure you keep your cell phone in between your arms while you type so you can keep an eye if there's a notification that comes in? That, by definition, would be media multitasking, using two forms of media at the same time. But it's not just using two devices. Even one device can easily be multitasking. It's designed for it. Think about it. Maybe you're writing a paper, one of the more studious things you could do on a laptop. So you need to go to Google and run a search. So the screen change, you look at Google, you click on the first link and the screen changes, and you scroll through that. No, that's not good. You go back, now the screen changed again. You click on the next link, screen changed again. Here's a good link. Copy, paste, switch over to your document, screen changed again. WhatsApp notification. I better check that. Well, what's the weather supposed to be tomorrow? Let me look at that. Okay, now where was I? Back to Google. Right. But I have an email. I better check that. Let me present. Right? This is how we work on a computer often. It's very rare that we focus on something for a long period of time. That is media multitasking. And what the studies show is that we don't actually multitask. Multitasking is a bit of a misnomer. We actually task switch. And they find that the more we task switch, the more it reduces our ability to focus and pay attention. In fact, Dr. Brad Huddleston, I think it was, in his book, Digital Cocaine, talks about multitasking, task switching, and he says that studies have indicated that task switching reduces concentration double that of smoking marijuana. Double smoking marijuana. I was like, wow. I actually went, though, and I looked into the research, and he's absolutely right. So this is, again, physiologically altering our brains, and we need to be very careful with that. So you say, okay, how do I avoid that? I need to use a computer. How do I avoid the task switching? Well, first of all, if you're working on your computer, take this thing called your smartphone, turn the notifications off, and put it on the other side of the room. I know you're struggling with that concept already. If you're working on now while you're working on the computer, turn the other notifications off, close the tabs that will distract you, and try your best to focus on one thing. They say it should be for 10 minutes to focus on one thing, which is really hard to do on a computer. I know that. But do your best. Make an effort not to have the distractions. And I know it's a necessary evil. We're utilizing these devices for good, I hope, but let's reduce the multitasking as much as possible for the health of our brains. But you say, what about educational media? Surely this is the redeeming factor of media. Surely here's an excuse that we can use it. Well, unfortunately, we're not finding any evidence to indicate that this is a redeeming factor in media or aspect of media. There was a school district in Arizona, the Kyrene School District, that have decided to be innovative and go all out when it comes to educational media. Since 2005, they've spent $33 million on educational media, and at the time this article was written, they had another $45 million on the budget to be spent on educational media. They had the best software, the best programming, the best training for their teachers. It was the best educational media program that they could develop. If anybody should see benefits from educational media, it should be Kyrene School District. It was a great experiment. So how's it going? Well, since 2005, the date they started using educational media, scores in reading and math have stagnated in Kyrene, even as statewide scores have risen. All around them, scores are going up. Their scores stay the same. They asked the district superintendent, well, do you have any evidence to show, good reasons for spending all these millions of dollars? He said, well, my gut is telling me we've had growth, but we have to have some measure that is valid, and we don't have that. Now, I'm no business person, but that seems like a really bad reason to spend $33 million. They did another study. This was a $10 million study. In other words, it cost $10 million to conduct the study of 15 educational software products. It was the most extensive federal study yet to follow methods that the U.S. Department of Education considers scientifically rigorous. In other words, the Department of Education said, whatever this study comes up with, we're going to respect. This was a well-conducted study. Here's what they found. No difference in academic achievement between students who used the technology in their classrooms and youngsters who used other methods. No difference. Now, I find this fascinating because here they are comparing traditional classrooms with the media classroom. I wish we could have had a third category in here. Because any teacher knows, it's a fact, a well-known fact in educational research, that if you can reduce class sizes and have more teachers, you will increase test scores. It's a better education, the smaller the student-teacher ratio. What if they would have had a third category of classrooms that were just a few students per teacher? I don't think they would have found no difference. I think they would have had a significant difference. Those classrooms were doing really well compared to the ones who were investing in media. But of course, the argument always, why can't we have more teachers, is we don't have any money to hire them. Wait a minute. We're spending $33 million on media, but we can't hire more teachers. There was an investor. His name's Tom Vander Ark, used to be the executive director for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Now he is investing in educational media companies, educational software companies. Now, if you're investing in something, say Toyota, the car company, you're spending millions of dollars investing in this company, and somebody asks you about this car company, about Toyota. They're like, what do you think about Toyota? Are they a good car? What are you going to say? Terrible, don't buy it. No, you're going to be like, you're going to invent a reason why Toyota is the best car out there, because the more Toyota sells, the more money you make. So here's a quote from an investor in educational media. I'm just thankful he's honest. He said, well, the data is pretty weak. It's very difficult when we're pressed to come up with convincing data. That's the best answer he could come up with. Who's investing in educational media? Again, thankfully he's honest. There is insufficient evidence to spend that kind of money. There's no body of evidence that shows a trend line. Larry Cuban at Stanford University. So, we don't have any evidence showing benefits from educational media. Do we have any evidence showing the opposite? Let's say schools who are not using media. Do we have any evidence that those schools may be doing better? Absolutely. We have a great illustration of that in the Waldorf schools. I'm not advocating for Waldorf schools. They have some philosophies that would not be in line with the Christian's viewpoint, but they do have some very good philosophies also. They believe that children should be playing. They should be doing artistic work, songs, games, stories, outdoor time, practical tasks, cooking, cleaning, gardening. Great program, good learning environment. But what's most fascinating is that they have a no media use policy until the 8th grade. Children are not allowed to use media until they reach the 8th grade. So how's it going for these students, these backward students who don't know how to use any media? How do they face the real world? 94% of Waldorf school graduates go to Ivy League universities. They're highly respected around the world. But what's probably even more fascinating is that there are some of these schools in and around the Silicon Valley. Now, why would that be? Why would there be tech-free schools in and around the Silicon Valley? Well, that's because the tech company CEOs and directors and computer engineers are sending their children to these schools. The chief technology officer of eBay sends his children to a 9-classroom school here, the Waldorf School of the Peninsula. So do employees of Silicon Valley giants like Google, Apple, Yahoo, and Hewlett-Packard. Is it possible they know something we don't? Alan Eagle, a computer scientist who works for Google, says, I fundamentally reject the notion you need technology aids in grammar school. The idea that an app on an iPad can better teach my kids to read or do arithmetic, that's ridiculous. Chris Anderson, CEO of 3D Robotics Company. My kids accuse me and my wife of being fascists and overly concerned about tech, and they say that none of their friends have the same rules. That's because we have seen the dangers of technology firsthand. I've seen it in myself. I don't want to see that happen to my kids. They know what it's doing. They're like, we don't want our kids in that. Steve Jobs, very famous name in the tech industry. At a time when Apple Computer was promoting the iPad for schools, saying every child needs an iPad, and if we can just achieve this, then we're going to fix our educational problems. The only problems it was going to fix was Apple's bank account. But they asked Steve Jobs, what do your kids think about the iPad? You'd think, the Jobs home must be this technological paradise. The walls must be touchscreen or something. He said, well, they haven't used it, the iPad. We limit how much technology our kids use at home. The ones promoting it, the ones selling it as educational, are saying, no, actually, we don't let our own children use it. But you say, well, how are they going to figure it out when they get older? Alan Eagle, computer scientist at Google, had a good response for that. It's super easy. It's like learning to use toothpaste. Did anyone go to school for years to learn to use toothpaste? Right? At Google and all these places, we make technology as brain dead easy to use as possible. There's no reason why kids can't figure it out when they get older. I have a friend who worked at a village school in Africa, and these kids have very little exposure to media or technology of any kind. But one day, he left his phone in the classroom accidentally. And he sent me some pictures later. He said, here's what happens when you leave your phone in the classroom. Selfies of African kids making all kinds of funny faces. How'd they figure it out? Brain dead easy. It's designed to not take a rocket scientist to use. So, first of all, we could say the argument that, if we train them in technology now, by the time they graduate, that technology is going to be obsolete. But beyond that, it's not designed to require special training. It's designed to be brain dead easy. So what we need to do is get back to reality. God created us for face-to-face communication, not communication through a screen. He created us for real, genuine activity and accomplishment of a task well done, not the supposed accomplishment of a task on a video screen. Studies find children learn to tie shoelaces later than ever before. You remember learning to tie your shoes? That's a milestone in childhood, isn't it? Today's children now learn how to operate complex technology before they learn how to tie shoelaces. Parents spend an average of 3.5 minutes per week participating in meaningful conversation with their children. I couldn't believe that. 3.5 minutes per week. But you may have heard of the protest that was done in Europe last year, I think it was, maybe the year before. Thousands of children marching down the street, holding signs, begging their parents to get off of the devices. So this is not just affecting children. This is affecting parents. Well, it was affecting the children, but the devices aren't just in the hands of the children. They're in the hands of the parents, and they're breaking apart the family because parents are not spending the time in conversation. This is not Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, about spending time together, developing the relationship. You can't do that in 3.5 minutes a week. Let's consider how childhood used to be. Well, you'd play outside, get plenty of physical exercise, help with the daily work, inside and out, learn by exploration, experience real-life consequences, learn with pencil, paper, textbooks, and a human teacher. Am I right? Yeah, that's how it used to be. But we've pushed that aside. We've replaced it with the screen. And so now instead of playing outside, they're playing on the smartphone and the tablet. Instead of getting physical exercise, they're sedentary, indoors, watching TV. Instead of helping with the daily work inside and out, the work has been replaced by screen-based entertainment. Instead of learning by exploration, we spoon-feed them pre-baked creativity. Somebody's already created it, imagined it, and we just hand it to them on a spoon or on a screen. They experience real-life consequences. Well, now you just press reset or Control-Z. Dr. Kadaris talks about in his book, Glow Kids, many instances of individuals, young men especially, who have done shootings, violent crimes, mass shootings. The last statistic I saw, actually, every single mass shooting in the United States was done by a video gamer. Every single one. Now, that doesn't, okay, don't confuse that and say, well, okay, if you play video games, you're going to be a mass shooter. No. But there's something there when 100% of mass shootings were done by those who were engrossed in violent video games. The one story that Dr. Cardaris told was a young man who had killed many people, and then he was taken by the police, and they interviewed him later, and he was filled with remorse for what he had done. Genuine sorrow. He felt genuinely upset about it. And as he explained his story, they looked into his background. He'd been playing video games for over 40 hours a week, violent video games. When he went from that virtual world into the real world and actually killed people, he had lost his ability to discern reality. He said later, I didn't actually understand that people would die. I didn't understand what was really happening. Of course, now he's spending his life in prison for what he's done. I have to say, I think it should be the video game designers who should be spending some time in prison, because they're the ones who really are at fault here. It should be illegal to create this stuff. And we've already talked about the differences in educational media now. So which side is better? Well, are there benefits to playing outside? Children who play outside are more fit and healthy, unlike those who use media who are less fit and healthy. They have stronger immune systems. Media has been found to decrease your immune system. They have more active imaginations. Media decreases the imagination. They're more creative. Media reduces creativity. Children who play outside have reduced stress and lower anxiety. Media increases stress and raises anxiety levels. Less aggressive and violent behavior in children who play outside. Children who are involved in media have more aggressive and violent behavior. Increased attention span from playing outside. Media reduces attention span. Better cognitive functioning from playing outside. Media lowers cognitive functioning. I mean, what a perfect counterfeit, right? God says this is the way childhood should be, and Satan says, I'm going to invent something that does the exact opposite on every point. Fresh air, stronger immune system again, fewer allergies, lower incidence of asthma, improves oxygen flow to the brain, contains phytoncides. Phytoncides are special chemicals released by the trees that help fight cancer. Sunshine provides vitamin D, improves eye health. We've already seen media does not do that. Reduce the risk of diabetes and heart disease. Raises serotonin levels. Positively affects sleep by adjusting circadian rhythm and melatonin levels. What kind of mud do we want children in? Let's go with the real mud, right? What kind of gardening? Let's go with the real gardening. Benefits of useful work. The list is long. All the benefits that you will not find in media. Remember this, parents. If your child can use a smartphone, he can easily operate any of the above. Now we view it like child abuse to make them do their laundry. No, friends, it's child abuse to give them unrestricted access to the cell phone. The more quiet and simple the life of the child, we were told in child guidance, the more free from the artificial excitement and the more in harmony with nature, the more favorable it is to physical and mental vigor and spiritual strength. We've seen a long list. But I want to clarify again, it's not just the children. Media is affecting all ages and many times is a successful tool of Satan to separate families because it absorbs the time of every member of the family. Young people, I want to challenge you. Take a detox. Take at least a few weeks where you only use, an hour or something a day. Really limit yourself. Just a minute, Danielle. And see how much better. See how much more you get done. How much extra time that you find that you have. You'll be amazed. Yes, Danielle, I want to add something else, but yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Exactly. Have you heard of the iPotty? It's a potty training tool that has an iPad mount on it. Because babies must be occupied while potty training, evidently. Thank you, Danielle. Yes. So, young people, I want to challenge you to this. Take this information and put it into practice. Don't, now you have some of the evidence why your parents were always grumbling or saying you shouldn't spend so much time on the media. But parents, I want to challenge you to set a good example. And parents with children, I'd like to add another point here. I was talking with a friend of mine recently who specializes in, who I should say also talks a lot about media use. And he was telling me I was telling him how I keep getting these requests to talk about media. Out of all the topics that I could cover, everybody wants to hear about media. And my friend said the same thing. He's produced 2 series on the effects of media. I've produced a series on the effects of media, and still people want more. How's media affecting us, they say? What's it doing to us? And we're like, well, here's 10 hours of information of what it's doing to you. Yeah, but I want to know, how's media affecting us? Where's the disconnect here? Or the common question that comes up, can you make this practical? I was reading the book by Brad Huddleston I mentioned earlier, and he talks about how in his seminars, he breaks it down. In the course of the day, use this many hours of media, don't use it 4 hours before bedtime, make sure all these practical strategies to reduce multitasking, breaks it down super practically. And people come up to him afterward, that was really good, Mr. Huddleston, but can you make that more practical, please? He's like, what are we missing here? And it makes me think of 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 7, which talks about those who are ever learning but never coming to a knowledge of the truth. And John 7:17, which says if we want to understand the will of God, we need to be willing to obey. I wonder if the disconnect here is we're not willing to follow it. I wonder if it's because we're just hoping that some new research will come out that will give us an excuse, some benefit of media. Finally, yes, okay, now I have a reason to use it. I don't think we're going to get there because we keep finding more negatives. We're told that truth that is not lived ceases to be truth. I wonder if we're not coming to a knowledge of this because we're not applying it. We're told that light, which is not accepted and followed, will become darkness to the recipient. And honestly, speaking about video games, I'm amazed that these things are even in our homes as Christians. We, the professed people of God, I just want to speak plainly here. We, the professed people of God, should not need the world's research to tell us video games are bad. We should know better. We shouldn't even consider something like that, which, first of all, has a lot of bad content. That should be reason enough to avoid it, because by beholding, we become changed. Secondly, what an enormous waste of time that should be devoted into the Lord's service. That should just be reason enough. Our attitude, it shouldn't be a question. It should be, video games? Are you serious? Those are for pagans. We just know. Smoking, drinking, video games, all in the same plane. Never in the home. It's not even an option. No place in the life of a Christian. It should be common sense, no-brainer, obvious for us. But what often happens is parents try to educate their children about the dangers. So many times parents propel their children up to me. Please, can you talk to my child about media? I want them to make better decisions. I'm like, well, really, this starts with the parents, though. A friend of mine was telling me, he spoke on media, did a seminar one time, and a 12-year-old boy came up to him and said, I have a problem. So every time we go to a seminar on media, my parents reduce my media allowance by a half an hour. So they said, we went to the seminar. I used to have 2 hours of media a day. I went to a seminar, or my family went to a seminar, and they reduced the media time by a half hour. So I had an hour and a half. That's okay. I survived. Well, then they went to another seminar on media. What do you think happened? Well, they reduced it by another half an hour. So now I only had an hour, but I survived. Well, then they went to another seminar on media, and they reduced it another half hour. I was okay with a half an hour. It's kind of tough. He said, but you know what? This is the 4th seminar we've gone to on media. What do you think this means? My friend was wise enough. He said, well, what do you think you want to do instead? And he said, well, I want to go outside. I want to go play outside. I want to go build a fort. I want to go camping. I want to learn how to start a fire. Typical boy stuff, right? And my friend said, well, why don't you do that? My parents won't let me outside. They say it's too dangerous. My friend said, I need to talk to your father. So I went and talked to his father. And he said, if you're going to take something away, you need to replace it with something else. To expect your child to just find something to do in this extra time that you're creating is not fair to a 12-year-old. You're going to need to spend some time together as a family. You say, child, I don't want you spending this time on the media. Depending on the age, maybe it's a young person. I don't want you spending this time on the media. Let's spend some more time together. For a young child, we're just not going to allow that anymore. And you just replace it with something else. They'll be happy to spend time with mom or dad playing outside. So I just really want to speak to the parents here. If the mother fails in her duty to instruct, guide, and restrain, her children will naturally accept the evil and turn from the good. We often focus on the instruction and the guidance, but what's the third step there? Restrain. There's some restriction that will need to be done by the mother. Consider the story of Eli. Eli, priest and judge in Israel, held the highest and most responsible positions among the people of God. As a man divinely chosen for the sacred duties of the priesthood and set over the land as the highest judicial authority, he was looked up to as an example, and he wielded a great influence over the tribes of Israel. But although he had been appointed to govern the people, he did not rule his own household. Eli was an indulgent father. Loving peace and ease, he did not exercise his authority to correct the evil habits and passions of his children. Rather than contend with them or punish them, he would submit to their will and give them their own way. Instead of regarding the education of his sons as one of the most important of his responsibilities, he treated the matter as of little consequence. The last sentence here, but Eli allowed his children to control him. The father became subject to the children. How many times is that happening today? God charged Eli with honoring his sons above the Lord. There's no greater curse upon households than to allow the youth to have their own way. Do we process that? No greater curse on households than just to allow youth to do what they want. Certainly there should be education, there should be guidance, there should be time together, relationship, all the things we've been talking about. We're not talking about these mandates that just come down with no reason and completely arbitrary. Please don't misunderstand that, parents. This should be very carefully done with proper education to go along with it. But it is still a God-given duty. When parents regard every wish of their children and indulge them in what they know is not for their good, media, the children will soon lose all respect for the parents, all regard for the authority of God or man, and are led captive at the will of Satan. The influence of an ill-regulated family is widespread and disastrous to all society. It accumulates in a tide of evil that affects families, communities, and governments. So parents, I challenge you. Take the helm. Take the responsibility God has laid upon you. But there's some hope to this too. There's some encouragement here. We're told that it is an important law of the mind, one which should not be overlooked, that when a desired object is so firmly removed as to remove all hope, the mind will soon cease to long for it. God has given us neuroplasticity and will be occupied in other pursuits. But as long as there is any hope of gaining the desired object, an effort will be made to obtain it. So with the removal of these bad things, it's done forever, never again. Not next month we'll talk about it, not in 6 months, not maybe a year, not in 5 years. It's done. It's not there for a Christian. We're just never doing it. You replace it with something else. You talk about the reasons why. But when you do that, when you remove it beyond all hope, soon, it's a law of the mind. Soon it will cease desiring for it. They won't want it anymore. But as long as you keep feeding that desire, it will just keep perpetually wanting it. Replace it with something better. I wish we had time for Tony to come up here and give us the testimony of this past year's camp meeting, where we had young people there who had been just full of media in their lives. They were just living media constantly, and now they come to Tony's place, and as anyone who's visited there, you really don't have any opportunity for media. No connection, no service there. And these young people loved it. They were pretty disappointed at first. Some of them, I was, as a researcher in this, I was noticing one of them in particular was exhibiting some genuine withdrawal symptoms from his addiction to media. But soon he was joined in with the rest of them, working, splitting firewood, working in the garden. He was enjoying that time. It was a transformation in their lives. So when it's removed completely without any hope of it returning, or at least, this was a temporary thing there at Tony's, but it was amazing to see. It's worth any sacrifice. At the judgment, don't be found unfaithful, not because you didn't warn them, but because you didn't take decisive action to avoid these things in the home. Any questions before we finish up? Any questions on media? I'm sure I've probably raised some, hopefully answered a few. Any clarifications I need to make? Yes, over here first.
I was wondering about, these glasses that you can wear.
Yes.
Is that effective?
Sure, it certainly helps. The best thing that you can do is to go outside in the afternoon to get that yellow light that helps prepare the body for sleep. But yeah, if you need to spend time on the screen, the glasses can help with that, definitely. Kind of like a blue light filter, it helps. It doesn't completely take away the negative side effects, but it definitely helps. How much does it help? I don't know. I don't really have, percentage or any numbers for that. But it's a man-made thing. It's a man-made invention. It's not going to be the ideal. God has given us an ideal. So it will be an improvement, definitely, though. So, yeah. Sure. Glad you asked that. Right. Audio is different. When we talk about media, we're talking about things with a screen, not necessarily listening to things. So, yeah, that would be perfectly fine. Although, I will speak to the parents here especially. Studies have found that listening to a recording of something does not enter the brain in the same way that actually somebody reading it out loud live does. They don't even understand exactly why. But studies have indicated that pretty clearly. So, there's been a trend lately that for the child's devotions, we sit them down with the iPod and they listen to their devotions. It's much better that the parent actually reads to them if they're not reading yet. But for an adult to listen to something, it's great. I do it all the time. Yeah, very, very good. Thank you. Yes?
What about during COVID right now, where school's online? Is there any way of combating that 10 hours that is...
Yeah, good question. Certainly there are some things that can be done, and really it starts with the teachers being willing to implement them. But things like in the assignments that you give, try to make them as hands-on as possible. In the reading assignments especially, print it off. Yeah, it uses a little bit of ink, a little bit of printer paper, but it's much better for the eyes. Studies find greater retention and comprehension reading off of a page compared to a screen. So those reading assignments, give it to them on paper. When possible, get a textbook, not a digital e-version of the textbook. Just try. I understand it's necessary right now in terms of the educational situation. but reduce the time as much as possible. What I've seen in, some parents are like, well, education, it's just necessary for their schooling. Oh, well. And they don't impose any guidelines or restrictions, and so the child, they might need 2 or 3 hours, 4 or 5 hours of educational media, but they're also getting another 5 hours of social media because there's no restrictions being put in place. So reduce the media time as much as possible, pare it back to the bare minimum, and then on top of that, do what you can to have in-person or I should say on paper reading assignments and things like that. Yeah, good question, right? Can media time be a reward? That is definitely not the best recommendation for a few reasons. So it's important that our children learn to view media as a tool and not a toy. So the problem with using it as a reward is that there's not necessarily, it's governed by the time. Like, okay, this is the time I have to cram as much fun stuff in as possible. Rather than, okay, this is a tool, when I need it to do some writing or something, I can use it, versus this reward. And so the reward system tends to generate an attitude of entertainment-based media versus necessary tool. For everybody, let's treat media as a tool and not a toy. Yeah, good question. Any others? Right. Okay, well, let's take a break. And then we will have our final session called Our Most Precious Treasure. I've saved the best for last. Completely understand some of you are like, I have to get outside and get some fresh air. If you can do that for a short period of time, run around the church a few times, that's great. If you need to leave, totally understand. But I will have the materials and things available as soon as sundown is here. So take, let's say, 10 minutes, and we'll come back for our last session. Maybe 15.